Mishcon Academy digital sessions.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this Mishcon Academy event. I'm Tim Thompson and I'm hosting this session. So it's my pleasure in this session to welcome Nazir Afzal, formerly Chief Crown Prosecutor for Crown Prosecution Service Northwest. Nazir was a prosecutor for about 24 years, was involved in a number of very high-profile cases during his time in the CPS, and was awarded an OBE for his work in the CPS. And just to complete the introductions, for those who don't know me, I'm a lawyer in the white-collar crime team at Mishcon, and I should add, I also used to be a prosecutor in the CPS. I think I first met Nazir in the early 90s. But Nazir, welcome.
Good afternoon to you, Tim.
So as a prompt to start the discussion, you've brought out a biography called The Prosecutor, and I'm going to hold up a copy of the book. I particularly like the design of the cover. It's a very sort of lawyer in-joke cover.
Yeah.
The redaction and the highlighting. Before we talk about some of the topics in the book, what made you decide to write a biography?
I didn't want to. It was I was approached by Penguin Random House about 2 years ago now, and they said, Nazir, let's have a conversation. So I had a conversation with them. They said, we'd like you to write your memoir, but initially the conversation, Tim, was around cases. Tell us about big cases, you know? And I said, fine, all right. So I went away and wrote about, well, just started writing about some cases. And they said, I thought I might do a preface to talk about my early years. And I did that, and they said, oh, this is interesting, actually. Can we have a bit more of that? So I ended up with 4 chapters about my early years. And they said, we just want themes. The cases should flow out of things that you were interested in or involved in. And so it wasn't something that ever occurred to me, Tim. It was something that they put in my head. And then I realized actually the whole process of writing itself was cathartic, number one, I imagine, but also reflective. I was able to look back and try and understand where we came from. You're absolutely right. I joined the service in '91, and we went through, I would imagine, a decade or so when really we weren't on anybody's radar as an institution. But then there was so much potential, wasn't there, in what we did and what we could have done. And so the writing of the book really was an accident more than anything else. I think that the final product is a statement really as to the journey I've been on, and I hope the journey that others have been on. And as you know, the tagline is one man's pursuit of justice for the voiceless. Again, it's not my tagline, it's their tagline. But it does demonstrate, to my mind, why I chose to do the job that I did, and I hope why you chose to do the job that you do.
I think one of the things that makes the book very readable is that you deal with legal issues and the challenges you faced in particular cases, but by telling the stories with a very human angle. How did that sort of approach develop?
You know, for me, it's an immense privilege that people, victims, survivors, share their stories with me, as they did with you when you were deputy chief in charge of complex case working. You know, these are people who are impacted by the most horrible things that human beings do to each other, literally impacted. Some of them have lost their loved ones. Others have been subjected to such harm that they'll never recover. And so we were very fortunate that they were prepared to share their stories with us. It was then our responsibility, our duty, to do what we could to deliver justice for them. And I'm nothing without the stories of these people and the impact they had on me. And so the stories that people have told me, the extraordinary impact, their extraordinary courage and their bravery never leaves you. And so absolutely, this book and my whole career is built on their shoulders. Very brave, courageous people. For us, the law was process, but that's easy. What's more difficult is ensuring that the human side of the law is engaged with. And I've always lived for that, and I've always wanted to be part of that. I clearly wanted to tell those stories.
Your book starts with you telling of how, as a teenager, you were the victim of a racially motivated assault in Birmingham. And you went home and you were saying you wanted to call the police, and your father said, effectively, there's no point, there's no justice for us.
Yeah.
And I think a theme running through the book is about your efforts to build confidence in communities, in different communities. Did your father's view of justice change while you were in the CPS?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, my father passed away in 2002. My mother, whom I mentioned earlier, passed away 2 months ago. I feel like an orphan now, as strange as it may sound, but my back then, absolutely, in the 60s and 70s, those of us who are old enough, and I know I am, I don't know if you are, Tim, racism was extraordinarily overt. It was skinheads on the street. I didn't have neighbors, I had witnesses. There was so much criminality. The only safe environment I had was my home. Outside of the home, attack, abuse, spits, threats, language. So is it no wonder that people of my father's generation felt there was no justice? The police never came. They weren't interested. They had other things to deal with. And it was never, hate crime wasn't a policing priority back then, etc. So absolutely, my father only ever saw me once in court, actually, and he came to London once and sat whilst I was doing some advocacy, and I used the F word a couple of times because I was opening the case, and when I came out, he said, "Don't use the F." I said, they're not my words; they're the words the offender used. But I think he was joking. He was joking. I think he understood. He understood that yes, we were now delivering justice. And hate crime was now being taken seriously, and it happened on our watch, didn't it? The legislation came in whilst we were serving. So I think things are very different. Although we've learned through Black Lives Matter and everything else this summer, we've still got a long, long way to go. And you and I again were part of the CPS during the McPherson inquiry, and how institutional racism. David Calvert-Smith, who was a DPP then, admitted that we were, as an organization, institutionally racist. The police were, in fact, every organization worth their salt admits to that. And, my personal view is that we haven't really changed a great deal since then. There was, to credit to the CPS, that I was appointed assistant chief 3 months after 9/11. As a good Muslim boy, it shows that we, as an organization, were more, were interested in talent and ability rather than just the color or whatever, or the face or whatever. But, institutionally, many organizations now haven't made the strides that we hoped they would have made 20 years ago. But I'm absolutely certain that my father, God bless him, would not recognize the world of justice now compared to what it was like back then.
One of the things you mentioned was the McPherson report and the whole discussion about institutional racism. And one of the things you discuss in the book is how that concept, helpful as it is in some ways, may have had an unintended negative effect in terms of police officers or authorities who feared to deal with, who felt too nervous to deal with certain cases or confront criminality because they were they were afraid of being accused of racism.
Yeah.
And how do you see that that tension being resolved?
Where we are today, policing numbers are down by 21,000 in the UK. Obviously, the government are committed to raising that level, but 21,000 officers, Tim, times 25 years on average experience, that's 500,000 years of experience you've lost. They won't be replaced by 20,000 new recruits. And additionally, until again, prosecutors are now being recruited, but we left in 2015. I had to deliver a 25% cut in my budget. We lost substantially experienced prosecutors. So it's much more difficult that's one issue right now. But let's go back. The Rochdale grooming gang case. A young girl walks into a takeaway restaurant in Manchester in 2008. She starts smashing it up. Police attend. They arrest her for criminal damage. She goes back to the police station and she tells them that she is being sexually abused by these men. Then there is an 11-month, by every account, and including the police themselves, really poor investigation by the police. They made a judgment about this victim that she would never be believed. that she has very traumatic and back history, that she's involved in low-level criminality, all of those reasons that we're all familiar with, and they went to 2 prosecutors. And again, the landscape back then was, the police, if the police come in with a very negative view of this case, you can put yourself in the shoes of those 2 prosecutors, can't you? Well, the police don't think that there's any hope, therefore we won't prosecute. So they decided not to prosecute. I arrived in the northwest of England, and by that time, the Times newspaper had been writing about these cases. And so it was brought to my attention that we had one on our books. It was this particular case. I took the view, I don't know if you ever did, but back in 2011, I had never reversed the decision to not prosecute a case until this one. And so I reversed the decision to prosecute. I took the view, the reason why she was being a victim, and by that time we now had, 2011, 47 victims of abuse. We now had 9 perpetrators. So our decisions not to prosecute, the police's decision not to investigate properly, all that did was allow the perpetrators to act with even greater impunity, to pick more victims, to feel they can get away with what they were doing. So it was absolutely essential that we brought them to justice. And as you know, we did bring them to justice in May 2012 when they were convicted. And it led to a seismic work around child sexual abuse in this country. But to answer your question, we have to go through a crisis like that or an experience like that before people begin to take it seriously. What then happens is knee-jerk. We change the law, we bring in some new guidelines. I think you were party to that conversation. And then we take our foot off the wheel because we've got so many other priorities. And that's when sustainability is always an issue for me. And I go back to what I said, if you've lost all the policing experience, prosecutorial experience, you're not necessarily going to be able to sustain the response. And so there have been recent occasions when we've been criticized. By we, I mean Police and Crown Prosecution Service have been criticized because they haven't done an effective job. And you know, the independent inquiry in child sexual abuse is taking place right now. I've given evidence to that. And, you know, we are further forward, but we're not as far forward as we could have been had we kept the resourcing in place, had we kept our foot on the accelerator.
You joined the CPS in 1991 in central London. And my perception at the time of the CPS was of an organisation that had a very white male leadership, largely inherited from the county prosecuting departments, but particularly in London, had a really diverse frontline workforce. Yeah. So when you joined with that sort of, that split setup, if I can put it that way, between the people immediately around you and the people leading the organisation, what were your ambitions and what did you feel in terms of what you could hope to achieve?
And you and I back in '98 when remember we got rights of audience at the same time, and we were off to Southwark Crown Court wearing our wigs and gowns for the first time, so to speak. You know, I just wanted to enjoy that experience of doing cases and doing a good job. That was my main driver. It was no more, no less. The way you described the senior management being white male and the rest of us not so. That's true. You know, going back to what I said earlier on, I spoke at a National Health Service event in January of senior leaders. There were 400 National Health Service senior leaders from around the country in the room. Now, the National Health Service, you will know, is between 20 and 25% from BAME backgrounds. I was the keynote speaker. The chair of the conference was Lord Victor Adebayo, who's the head of the National Confederation, NHS Confederation. And that's it. Everybody in the audience, every one of the 400 senior leaders was white. And that's the National Health Service. So I don't think we should criticize ourselves for the fact that the prosecution service and the legal profession is still challenged by it, but we've made more progress, in my view, than at some institutions which pride themselves on their diversity.
Excellent, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us and for being so open and candid. I'm sure everyone's found it really interesting.
I'm grateful to you all. I wish you well.
Thanks, Nazir.
The Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions. To access advice for businesses that is regularly updated, please visit mishcon.com.